Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas acá en Chile. Buenos días a nuestros participantes desde California. Recordemos que tenemos 5 horas de diferencia con California, ahora con Chile. Y felices de que nos puedan acompañar hoy día en este seminario que hemos llamado Centralized Data Management. Y bueno, en este seminario internacional lo que hemos buscado, y como hemos buscado también en todas nuestras iniciativas desde el centro de UC Davis Chile, es generar un intercambio de experiencias, ideas con nuestros panelistas nacionales e internacionales. ¿Sí? Desde UC Davis Chile estamos muy contentos de haber podido convocar a distintos actores y protagonistas de la gestión del recurso hídrico en Chile y California, quienes han aceptado muy generosamente participar en esta plataforma de conversación, que nos permitirá principalmente tener una visión sobre la experiencia, sobre las brechas, sobre las oportunidades, sobre los aciertos que han habido tanto en California, y ojalá poder también generar esa conversación con la situación hoy día en Chile, y esperamos que desde California, considerando las similitudes en muchos aspectos, puedan servir de experiencia para nuestro país. Como les decía, la idea es poder tener esta instancia de compartir experiencia con los actores en Chile, ver los avances, los desafíos, ver el estado del arte, cómo está California, cómo estaba California años atrás y cómo ha ido usando gran parte de la información para ir mejorando a futuro desde Chile con la experiencia que ellos también han tenido. Y como dije antes, no solamente con los aciertos, sino también con los errores, que yo creo que uno también aprende mucho de los errores que ya se han hecho en otros países. Acá la red a la que hemos querido llegar hoy día son entidades públicas, empresas, ONGs y universidades, con los cuales nosotros acá desde el centro hemos tratado de trabajar en forma conjunta y entre todos poder tener una mejor gestión de los recursos hídricos en las diversas condiciones y además dentro de los diversos ámbitos. Creo que es muy importante resaltar que UC Davis Chile también hoy día es parte del consorcio de gestión de recursos hídricos de la zona de la macrozona centro-sur, un proyecto recientemente, o en realidad no tan reciente, un año, adjudicado por la Corfo, donde también es una oportunidad para agrupar distintas visiones y con un trabajo mucho más técnico. La idea nuestra es poder compartir, al igual que en este consorcio, en esta actividad, una mirada de visión sustentable, comunitaria, amigable con el medio ambiente, temas que sé que también han sido muy importantes en California y aportando desde el ecosistema que la Universidad de California ha también favorecido en el estado de California, en Estados Unidos. Este es la primera actividad de un ciclo de 3 actividades que tiene como fin disponer el conocimiento y avance de California en materias de medio ambiente, gestión hídrica, gestión de cuenca, aguas subterráneas, sistemas de monitoreo, cambio climático en general, con todo lo que eso conlleva, análisis de datos, sequía, incendios, cuidado del agua, políticas públicas, iniciativas privadas, conocimiento académico, iniciativas técnicas, tecnologías que se pueden ir incorporando. Bueno, también queremos agradecer a nuestros partners de este evento, Captahidro, y a las organizaciones que hoy día nos han apoyado en forma estratégica, en primer lugar a la Embajada de los Estados Unidos, al USDA, también en Chile le llamamos el USDA, que es el United States Department of Agriculture, a Andes Chile, al Consorcio Tecnológico del Agua, a la Fundación Chile Lagos Limpios, al Ministerio de Obras Públicas, y muy en especial a la Dirección General de Aguas, quien su director ejecutivo estará presente con nosotros moderando el próximo panel, al Ministerio de Agricultura, dentro del Ministerio de Agricultura, la Comisión Nacional de Riego, y por supuesto a la Corfo y a la Agencia Nacional de Investigación y Desarrollo, ANI, que han hecho posible que UC Davis como universidad pueda instalar este centro de excelencia en Chile hace ya más de 6 años y poder generar estas instancias de relación. También agradecer a nuestro partner digital, Centrum Eventos, convenciones y exhibiciones virtuales, y que han sido muy útiles en estos tiempos de pandemia. Tuvimos que acostumbrarnos a poder vincularnos con el ecosistema local e internacional de esta forma, sin vernos necesariamente. Creo que hemos perdido café y los galletitas y los pastelitos entre medio de los coffee breaks, pero la verdad es que nos ha facilitado también el poder tener cada vez mejores invitados y personas que no necesariamente tienen que viajar miles de kilómetros para poder estar aquí con nosotros, y que también se agradece desde ese punto de vista. Bueno, les recordamos ya detalles mucho más operativos, que contamos con interpretación simultánea al inglés y al español, a los que pueden acceder haciendo clic en el icono abajo de Zoom que tiene como un planeta, donde ustedes ahí eligen el lenguaje que les acomode más. Les recuerdo también que nos pueden encontrar en redes sociales como UC Chile. Y ahora vamos a realizar una breve encuesta para entender cuáles son los principales desafíos en la generación de información útil para la gestión de agua desde el punto de vista de ustedes como audiencia, ¿ya? Esta encuesta va a estar abierta hasta el segundo panel, donde vamos a mostrar los resultados de la audiencia que esté presente. Y queremos invitar a ustedes, a todos los participantes, a escanear un código QR que está apareciendo ahí en la pantalla, no sé, ahí, al revés, ahí, al otro lado. Bueno, ahí se ve la pantalla al revés. Y desde sus celulares, se abrirá una página web con una encuesta, y cuando salga la pregunta, ustedes pueden ahí ir seleccionando sus alternativas. Si tienen problemas para escanear el código QR, pueden ingresar a la página slido.com, slido.com, e ingresar ahí con el código hashtag UCDavidChile, UCDavidChile todo junto. El código, como les dije antes, este código va a estar disponible hasta el final de este panel. Bueno, no los aburro más con temas operativos y dejo con ustedes a Oscar Cristi, como dije antes, director general de Aguas del Ministerio de Obras Públicas, quien moderará el primer panel con nuestro keynote speaker. Así que, Oscar, dejo toda la audiencia para ti.
Gracias, Mauricio. ¿Se escucha bien? Entiendo que se escucha bien. Gracias por invitarnos a participar en este panel, que para nosotros es muy importante porque el tema de la información es uno de los grandes desafíos que tiene la Dirección General de Agua, el manejo de datos, la generación de datos. Es un elemento fundamental, más aún es una de las obligaciones de la Dirección General de Agua. De acuerdo a nuestras normas legales, el Código de Agua, compete a la Dirección General de Agua llevar todo el registro de la información hídrica del país, de la infraestructura hídrica, etc. También en la Mesa Nacional del Agua, que fue conformada por el presidente Piñera ya hace 2 años, que reúne a un grupo muy transversal de personas, el tema de la información ha sido un tema de debate y de propuesta. En particular, hay toda una propuesta de una nueva institucionalidad para el agua en el país, que tiene como uno de los elementos fundamentales una división de información hídrica que aúne los esfuerzos de las distintas instituciones que hay en el país y que generan data e información para este tema. También la Dirección General de Agua está muy involucrada en el desarrollo de planes de gestión por cuenca, donde uno de los elementos primarios es la modelación y la generación de nueva data. También es un placer en lo particular estar aquí junto a UC Davis, donde tantos de nuestros profesionales en materia hídrica se han formado, y donde los que nos dedicamos al tema del agua hemos leído tantos papers y tantos artículos de algunos extraordinarios profesores de UC Davis en el tema de agua. Y también, sobre todo, tener a 2 connotados speakers de California, donde California siempre ha sido un referente para Chile, porque compartimos un sistema similar en cuanto a los derechos de agua, la propiedad de los derechos de agua, y siempre estamos aprendiendo de California en materia de infraestructura, de instrumentos de gestión, de instrumentos económicos para hacer frente a la sequía. Por tanto, es muy relevante poder siempre escuchar la experiencia de California, porque la tomamos con muchísimo interés en el país. Y en esta ocasión tenemos 2 panelistas de lujo. Greg Gerhardt, que es director adjunto de la Junta de Control de Recursos Hídricos del Estado de California, y Keimar Gebechi, que es gerente de la División Estatal de Gestión Integral del Agua, perteneciente al Departamento de Recursos Hídricos de California, que nos van a estar hablando justamente de cómo se pueden aunar los distintos esfuerzos para hacer una adecuada gestión hídrica. De acuerdo al programa que me han entregado aquí los organizadores, muy detallado, deberíamos haber estado partiendo a las 3:10, estamos unos 5 minutos atrasados, y la propuesta es que cada uno de nuestros speakers, comenzando por Greg, tengan 15 minutos para hacer su presentación y después tengamos unos 20 minutos aproximadamente para las preguntas y respuestas. Entonces, para no dilatar, yo invito a Greg a que pueda comenzar, si le parece, con su presentación. Greg.
Thank you. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here today and to be working alongside the government of Chile, the UC Davis folks that organize this, and mostly it's an honor to present again our story about our journey towards a better data infrastructure at the California Waterboards. I am going to share my presentation. Hopefully that shows up. So, as mentioned, I am the Deputy Director at the California Waterboards organization for essentially data is my title. It's a long name of the office, and I'll get into what we do, but I'm going to do a couple of things with this presentation. I'm going to share the story of the California Waterboards as we have embarked on this journey of making open data a central driver for everything that we do. But also, I'm going to share a little higher level of a view that I've had the pleasure and honor of being a part of, called a project called the Internet of Water, that has spanned across the country to make sense of this sort of open data and water data infrastructure and to develop it. This is a very iterative process. I like the idea of talking about mistakes. We've made plenty of mistakes in our journey to do this. I'll try to highlight a couple, but we can talk about that in the questions and answers too. For orientation, there's 10 boards in California that are called the Waterboards. 9 of these are regional boards. They have hydrologic basins as boundaries. They span the whole state of California, and they directly deal with water quality. They don't deal with water rights. They don't deal with drinking water. These are 9 regional boards that directly deal with water quality. The 10th board is the state board, and the state board is has the whole state as jurisdiction. It also has water rights, drinking water, provides financial assistance. This is a busy slide with lots of data. I'm going to make my slides available to anyone who wants them. But the information on this slide summarizes how big of an organization we are. I'll highlight that there's about 2,500 employees at the Water Board. We have over 50 programs, lots of different financial assistance projects where we give money out in loans and grants, and we are a fee-based organization, so we get our money, most of our money for everything is paid for by fees from the people that we work with and regulate. One of the core principles that you'll hear about with the joint presentation with CAMIAR is about open data. For those of you who don't know about open data, this is a summary of what it is, what it means. It's essentially turning data into machine-readable and accessible data that is well described so that people have context for how to use the data. It's reusable and it's managed. It has a stewardship component to it. So open data is really foundational to the work that we've been doing in California, at least in the last 5 years. The work that I've been doing in CAMIAR and others is it's about transforming organizations. It's about transforming infrastructure. You may have heard this before, but we really believe that water data infrastructure is water infrastructure. And so investing in your water data as if it were pipes and reservoirs and levees is just as important for the advancement of the public trust that's been given to us to manage water in California. One of the areas that I'm going to focus on is how we unlock the data. Many of you probably understand that a large government organization like ours that's been using data over the last decades or so now has what we would call a legacy infrastructure. A lot of databases that were built 10 plus years ago. These legacy systems are not designed to release data very easily. So we spend a lot of our energy in California, in my organization, working to unlock some of these data flows and to make the data flow literally out to a public place. And open data is our ideal endpoint for that. So I'll talk about that. Some characteristics of the Waterboard again, a profile of us. We have over 40 enterprise database applications that are considered valuable and vital to the business and to the public trust. We have data that spans the topics of water quality, water rights, drinking water, financial assistance, and other topics. We have both programmatic data, which would be described as data about the facilities, our activities, how many inspections we do, how many permits we write. That's programmatic data. We also have a large category of data that we refer to as environmental or ambient data. This characterizes surface waters, groundwater, water use, and water conservation, topics like that. So when people ask about our data, there's just as much interest in programmatic data by some, and many of our public groups that are watching us and partnering with us, they want just as much about our program data as they do want to know about our environmental data too. We have our data available in two sort of basic forms. These links are live to the Waterboard's website. One is a data catalog that just describes literally everything I just said in more detail. The other is the open data resources that we publish. You'll hear more about the law that requires that with CAMIAR, but the open data resources, we have about 46 data set resources now. Most recently, we put all of our water rights data out, which is huge, by the way. This is a scary slide meant to scare you. And this describes the environment that our information technology world, how they view our water data world. And so every one of these little can description or can diagram elements is a database of some sort. And it may not actually be a database, it may be an ideal database, but there was this vision 5 years ago to put all the data in the right places so that the databases live together in silos and in families of silos, and how they all relate to each other was described with many arrows. This is actually a very useful diagram to show how hard it is for organizations like us, and I'm sure many of you out there have organizations like this, different scales, to sort of unlock some of these data elements that are trapped in cans. We live and die by looking at the world through the data lifecycle. So this is a cartoon describing how we view the data lifecycle. So improving data flows has to do with looking at the critical path and finding strategic ways to improve the data flow throughout this life cycle. So data is collected, and it's collected usually by a driver, maybe a permit, and eventually it makes its way out to a information piece at the bottom of this cartoon. And along the way, there's different sort of pieces and elements that, again, this is conceptual, not real, but these are great ways to think about how to unlock your data, is to break it up into these elements and to take a stab at improving one at a time. This is a screenshot of our open data website that we use to publish our open data resources with some examples of the kinds of resources that we have listed there. Another key work that we do is building capacity. This goes along with improving the data flows, but it also means that we're improving our people. So at the end of the day, we work with people. All of our organizations are people driven, and building up capacity means training and providing what we call a data literacy strategy. So we've actually developed a data literacy strategy. We have what we call a College of Water Informatics at our organization that serves to advance those 4 goals that are listed. This is a work in progress. It's relatively new, but it is already very popular and doing good things. One of the things that we have done is rolled out a course for our workforce that is also available as open source to anyone who wants to go through these modules. It's a program developed in partnership. We worked with the amazing Ryan Peak and Rich Palou down at the bottom left, and they built a course called R for Water Resource Data Scientists that's customized for the water boards, but it's available for anyone, and it's online course. So that's a good project that we've done, very popular. Those of you who don't know, there's a lot of staff that come in. Our workforce comes in with a lot of R coding skills, or at least ability to learn R pretty quickly. So that's what we've been focusing on as our main tool. We also do a lot of engagement with our data, and that means we work with people to sort of understand how they use our data, what they want it for, what's good about it, what's bad about it, what's missing. We do this with people that work at the Waterboard as well as the public. These are some descriptions of our activities. With the outside facing world, we do things like a data challenge or a hackathon or a datathon. or just other kinds of engagement events around particular topics, for example, maybe trash or something. We also work internally with our programs, and this is not separate from each other. There's often an iterative path where we find out, working with the public, that they want more drinking water data. We work with the drinking water program then to try to engage and see what we can do to produce better data. And it's a loop. It's an iterative loop. We also use this as a recruitment tool. It works quite well to bring people into the workforce at our water boards. They find out what we do, they like what we do, and they come and work for us. This is a cartoon. We work together with some partners to run these engagement events. We have paid facilitators, illustrated facilitators that provide artifacts that we can carry forward that tell the story of the amazing collaboration and partnership that occurs at some of these events. These are the partners that we have worked with. Many of them might be around today. One of the more popular topics that we've worked on is trash. It's a big problem in the world as well as in California. And in particular, this has a data element to it that's very, very challenging. Not much monitoring information or information about trash is collected, and the data that is collected is often not interoperable and usable. So we've spent many events where people come and volunteer their time to help us improve the data resources around trash. And that's been a real success and fun. The Internet of Water I mentioned, so that was California's story, and what I've been working on with my shop to try to improve the culture and the infrastructure of data at the water boards in California. The Internet of Water came up about 5 years ago as a project to look at this same idea across the country. It's aspirational. In many ways, we have said that the Internet of Water succeeds, it will disappear. Nobody will know it ever existed. It will produce infrastructure of water data that interoperates, not unlike the weather data in our world, where it's highly structured. There's lots of standards that are made available and principles of moving the data around so that all of us have access on our phones to weather information. This would be sort of an ideal aspirational example of what the water infrastructure could look like for certain topics. And so this project is going through a transformation, but it's very exciting, and it is trying to actualize the open water data of California in a larger context. One of the projects that we worked on was partnering with the Internet of Water on a harmful algal bloom, and particularly focusing on community and tribal engagement. We have a lot of harmful algal blooms in California. These cause lots of impacts. They cause deaths to pets and health impacts to humans, as well as financial impacts and lots of distress in California. So, and the tribes are the most vulnerable of our communities that are suffering from some of these impacts. So we've tried to improve our data infrastructure by working with the Internet of Water. There's a great example of how to document data modernization around this kind of a project. On the right, the link is available by clicking on that, but you can also look at the Internet of Water. There's a webinar coming up on it in a couple of days. Another great project that the Internet of Water is doing is called Geoconnects. It's essentially trying to build a persistent identifier system that solves the problem of URLs for hydrologic features that disappear. We have lots of different stewards of these features. And when the URLs change or disappear, our ability to sort of integrate data across that fabric of the landscape goes away. And so this project with USGS and Internet of Water is trying to build a more persistent, resilient fabric of environmental and hydrologic features that would allow anyone to build their other data on top of that fabric. And so this is a really exciting project. Don't have time to talk about it much, but it's available to research on your own. And then finally, the water boards use the data to drive what we do. We've had a performance report for over 14 years. Just one example of the kind of information in our performance report on our website is some data around our sanitary sewer overflows. These are when our wastewater collection systems have a problem and belch out a bunch of wastewater and sewage into the environment. And so these region numbers on the left and the data is all available as a live interactive visualization and dashboard. It allows us to tell stories over time. This is an example of the kind of data that we have that's available for just this one program. There's, again, hundreds of different report cards on our performance report that summarize different kinds of activities in California. But this one in particular is interesting because it has such a good community impact overlay that you can start understanding how it affects the public. Sanitary sewer overflows is also one of the things that we've identified as a potential area to intersect with our equity work. We do a lot of work on racial equity and water equity in particular. And this means identifying your lowest, most vulnerable communities and centering on them to make sure that you're lifting them up. And by lifting them up, you're lifting all the other community elements up. And so sanitary sewer overflows is one data set we're using for that. We also have these water quality report cards. This is an example of one. I won't show it to you, but it's a live story map, like you'll see in a minute, that goes through the story of the West Fork Carson River and the work that the Lahontan Regional Board is where Lake Tahoe is. Those of you who know where that is. This is a story about the work that they did to improve the water quality in that river. There's another example with a story map. We have lots of water quality stories that people want to tell. And it's very important for us to make sure that we are providing some ability to speak to the outcomes of actually improving water in California. And I will stop there.
Gracias, Greg. Aún no veo algunas preguntas. Podríamos esperar a la presentación siguiente, ¿no? de Camiar, y entonces ahí ver si tenemos un conjunto de preguntas. Si te parece, Camiar, ¿podrías tú ahora comenzar con tu presentación?
Certainly, Oscar. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Good morning to those in California and good afternoon to our colleagues in Chile. Kamiar Giveci, I work with the Department of Water Resources, and we've been involved over the last 5+ years to build an open water data portal platform in the state of California. And I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to share with you the work that we've done. And the way that I'd like to do that is to actually walk you through, give you an overview of our implementation journal. So we're actually looking at a live story map, as Greg just showed you an example of. And this is telling the story of implementing the state of California's open water data effort. But before I get into the data part, I'd really like to set the context, because I think that's what is the big driver and motivation. In California, as in Chile, water is all about the extremes, the wet extreme, the dry extreme, and climate change is making those more consequential. Another challenge that we face here in California is a highly decentralized way of managing and governing water. And that is both geographically based as well as our multiple water sectors. And each of our institutions and each of our water sectors have their own silo of data and information. And to really step up to the challenge of climate change and working toward a more adaptive and resilient future, we have to, it's essential to bridge the data silos and to get our water sectors and institutions to work together more effectively. So this open water data effort in California is really, as Greg mentioned, the foundational information infrastructure for doing what we need. So what I'd like to do is give you a quick overview of the implementation journal, and I invite you afterwards to visit this site and really get into the details. So again, because of the extremes that we live in, it was actually during our previous multi-year drought that the governor and the legislature passed new laws to develop an open and transparent Water Data Act. It's also called Assembly Bill, or AB 1755. And this, more than anything else that I've seen in my career at the Department of Water Resources, has provided an opportunity to bring water and ecological data together and make it more accessible to those who need to make critical water decisions. 8 state agencies, one of which is the State Waterboard that Greg Gerhardt is with, the Department of Water Resources, Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Water Quality Monitoring Council, the Delta Stewardship Council, the Office of Planning and Research, and a few others have partnered together. We call ourselves the partner agency team. And we have worked over the last 5 years to really build this, I think, very foundational piece of work. We were very fortunate that at the time that we were directed to start working, the California Natural Resources Agency, of which my department is a part of, and the California Government Operations Agency, or GovOps, had already begun developing open data portals. And rather than create yet another piece of technology or data architecture, we decided to take a federated approach to link together these existing open data portals. And this has now provided us the opportunity to actually invite and link in other open data portals in the future. I mentioned the Natural Resources Agency portal. What you see on the right side of this story map is the active website for the Natural Resources Open Data Portal. And these are topical groupings of data. We have showcases that really highlight how data is helping make important decisions, and that data information. Here is the GovOps Open Data Portal, and this is again their live website. And working together, we have now begun federating the data from multiple state agencies as well as multiple federal agencies. We also, the partner agency team, worked extensively to help create what's called the California Water Data Consortium. This consortium is unique in that it includes state agencies, academia, nonprofit organizations, water utilities, and others. And this is a public-private partnership that is really expanding our opportunity to bring more data together and make it accessible to the water data community in California. This on the right is the website of the consortium, and the consortium is now engaged in multiple pilot projects that we all are helping to advance. We've also put together a strategic plan for this open water data effort, and it includes 4 shared goals that will make data sufficient, accessible, useful, and used by for water management in California. So to make data more sufficient, we have begun developing inventories, catalogs of our water and ecological data across multiple state and federal agencies. You saw in some detail from Greg Gerhardt's presentation how much data just one department or state agency manages and responsible for. Now multiply that by multiple times, and what we are working on is creating a federated data catalog to provide access across our institutional and water sector silos. So to date, we have about 1,700 critical water and ecological data sets and visualizations that have been prepared and published on the open data platform. And on this page, back in August of 2020, we did just one search on groundwater data and received 164 data sets from multiple state and federal agencies. So one of the other things that we're really working on is to make sure this is not just a compilation of data for data's sake, but it's really intended to help data users make critical decisions. And as in doing that, we partnered with the University of California Water Initiative to prepare a report called Data for Water Decision Making. I encourage you to check it out. It's really about having use cases as the center of deciding how to compile and organize our data. It also, as I mentioned, we're including showcases and metrics pages to support this effort. As Greg Gearhart mentioned, engagement with the community is critical to for a successful data effort. Again, data with a purpose, putting data to work. And what you see on the right side is the website of the Internet of Water that Greg Gearhart described. And in the prior section, you saw the Water Data Consortium website. These are really effective state-based and nationally based collaboratives and networks for open data. And our effort in California has learned extensively from collaborating with them. So we are continually adding additional data sets. We're working to improve our metadata standards and the way that data are described so that users can make more effective use of that data. And looking into the future, we really want to make sure that people continue to use our data, and we invite you and others to experience our federated open data portals to provide us feedback on how we can improve the data to make your water management decisions more effective. Certainly for more information, we invite you to visit the open portal, open data webpage. And I encourage you to sign up for the listservs of what we call the AB 1755 effort using the email on the screen, as well as the Water Data Consortium and the Internet of Water. And at the end of the implementation journal, we've compiled all of the URLs that we featured to make it easier to access in the future. And then in conclusion, we certainly look forward to our continued collaboration with you and to look for a day when we have a federated open data portals between Chile and California. Thank you.
Gracias, Kemia. Muy buenas las dos presentaciones. Tenemos algunas preguntas para nuestros expositores. Una de ellas, quizás comenzando por Greg, es en relación al tamaño de los waterboards. específicamente alguien pregunta por los 2.500 empleados, que es un número muy significativo, y la pregunta es si esto nació así o se ha ido incrementando o ha ido creciendo en el tiempo asociado a las crisis de agua en California. No sé, Greg, si quieres comentar algo al respecto.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We have changed our organizational shape and size over time. I wouldn't necessarily directly attribute a lot of that to water crisis. We acquired the Division of Drinking Water from a different state agency about 7 years ago. That brought in a significant number of new employees to the Waterboard organization, added a whole new division, many offices that deal with drinking water in California. And then we've had some other programmatic growths that do relate to ensuring safe, affordable drinking water for people in California. And that is definitely related probably to the water crisis. We've also had some growth in our organization due to new programs like the cannabis program. In California, we had to develop rapidly a new permitting structure for providing regulatory oversight to folks who wanted to legally grow cannabis in California. So those three things were probably the big growth areas that I can think of off the top of my head. But it is a good question. We weren't this big, and we are now struggling with the size of employees as well as the amount of money that we distribute to people.
Gracias, Greg. Hay una pregunta. Un tema que tú mencionaste es el catálogo de datos o el catálogo de información. Y la pregunta es, justamente cuando hablamos de información o data hídrica, pueden ser muchos los tipos de información. ¿Cómo o qué consejo darías tú para iniciar el catálogo? Entendiendo que en el catálogo vamos a ponernos de acuerdo qué es lo más relevante, cuál es la información más importante y quizás con la cual hay que comenzar. En los proyectos que estamos trabajando en Chile también, en los proyectos que están elaborándose, se habla de un catálogo que se va a conformar, donde se va a establecer qué es la información que hay que recolectar, cuál es la que hay que entregar. Pero en tu experiencia, ¿cuáles son los criterios más básicos para generar este catálogo de información, primero básica y después puede ir creciendo?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think it's very important, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, that we develop data catalogs and data information systems that bridge our institutional data sets and our water sector data sets. We're now recognizing that in California, to meet the challenge of climate change and other challenges, we really have to get our water sectors to work together. Up to now, our flood managers, our groundwater managers, our water supply managers, our water quality managers have by and large worked in our respective areas and silos. And we have to really use integrated data and information systems to begin sharing the information we're going to need to step up to the future challenges. So we think that watershed scale activities is very important because over millennia, the water cycle and the way it functions evolved naturally. And our human and institutional activities have in many cases disrupted and fragmented the management of those natural systems. So I would encourage developing data catalogs that really bring together data from multiple water sectors and water institutions and then using use cases to really focus what are the key decisions that need to be made to plan and implement the infrastructure projects that are deemed important in Chile.
Gracias, Kemian. Aquí hay una pregunta para Greg y para Kemian que podrían contestar, quizás comenzando por Greg y después complementando Kemian. ¿Cuál ha sido la influencia de la tecnología que se ha desarrollado en Silicon Valley en el manejo de la información hídrica o en la gestión hídrica? Si quieres comenzamos con Greg.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. The data lifecycle that I talked about of how we collect data, where we store data, and then how we make it accessible, every element of that has been affected by the technology advances in the world and in Silicon Valley's case in particular. One of the areas that comes to mind is we've moved a lot of our legacy data systems into a cloud environment. We have more to do, but that is definitely one tremendously disruptive in a positive way aspect that makes data more accessible and more available to machine connections. So these application program interfaces or APIs, machine-to-machine learning or machine-to-machine connections have dramatically improved the ability to turn that lifecycle into a rapid flow of data to an application, for example. So that's one area where advances in Silicon Valley have helped us a lot. We've also seen some pretty interesting developments with sensor technologies in California and across the world. And we're trying to make use of that. Our organization doesn't deploy very many sensors. We make other people do that. So there's a lot of partnerships that are in play right now to take advantage of that great advancement of sensor and technology advancement. And I'll let Camiar add to that.
Thanks, Greg. I think you've covered it. I would just note that maybe 30, 40 years ago, the approach for trying to get data together was building a centralized database and trying to vacuum in as much data as possible. Yet what that did is it really disconnected the data from the data providers who are really the best equipped to understand and manage the data. And often what would happen, the data in these centralized databases would get outdated and were not as useful. The technology that we have today is really why we have been able to federate multiple portals and institutional data sets, and as well as the cloud, as Greg mentioned. So I think that's really the way to go because it provides maximum flexibility and it engages and involves many more people. As you may have experienced in Chile, I know we have here in California, people who collect data and manage it are very protective about that data. And it's very hard to get all of them to agree on a single data management software or technology. And the current technology has helped to get us past that. And we can now really focus on finding the data, making it accessible, and then organizing the data around these use cases that are so important in supporting our decision making.
Gracias. Nos quedan unos minutos para una última pregunta. Dice, en relación con esto último que ustedes comentaban de múltiples instituciones que generan los datos y cómo se pueden integrar. Es una realidad que en el país nosotros en Chile vivimos. Tenemos muchas agencias públicas que generan data en torno al agua. Tenemos también organizaciones privadas, como son las organizaciones de usuarios. Y la discusión ha sido si es necesario integrar o generar una sola gran instancia que genere los datos, o más bien una instancia que pueda coordinar a las distintas generadoras de datos. En ese esquema de mantener a quienes generan los datos y buscar la forma de integrarlo, nos gustaría conocer la experiencia de ustedes en cómo se integran lo público con lo privado. Si acaso hay una agencia que determina un estándar de la información que se va a subir a este sistema, si acaso hay algunos estándares para los privados que tienen que cumplir para ingresar a este sistema, para que finalmente la información que se entregue tenga cierta validación. Preguntar, quizá ahora comenzar con Kemian y finalmente con Greg, ¿cuál es su reacción ante esta pregunta?
Well, I think Greg really touched on it in his presentation, that data is as much about people and processes than it is as it is technology. And I think sometimes we tend to over focus on the technology at the expense of the building people capacity and changing our business processes to really support and empower the ability to use the data effectively. So I think the California Water Data Consortium that I described is a very great example of a public-private partnership in California. It's very unique because the state doesn't run it and the locals don't run it. We are equal partners in its operation, its decision-making, deciding what pilot projects to work on, and so you might ask yourselves, why would people get involved? What you have to do is demonstrate the value that they get by doing so. By being part of the open water data community, they get access to information that will help them make the decisions that their institution or their water sector needs to make.
And since Kenya so expertly covered the people side of that equation, I'll cover a little bit of the technology side of that question, or the data science side. I think there's some clear steps that can be taken. We learned a lot from Australia and the work that they did 10 years ago to deal with their water data integration problem across their whole continent. And multiple interviews and discussions with the Australians led us to believe in a path towards first setting up an ideal water data model for the topic that you're dealing with. So if it's water use across public and private entities, there are some examples of what a data model or a data standard, a compilation of data standards is another way to think of a data model. And making use of that as sort of like your center goal, and letting data sets either aspire to come into that data model and transform into that shape, or to encourage it with a little stronger. If you have regulatory authority, you can make data sort of transform into the right data model. That's a really critical step because, as you probably all understand, making different data types work together on a one-by-one basis is extremely laborious and not reproducible. The FAIR principles come to mind, and so there's some tools out there besides looking at Australia and the FAIR data principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. I think I got those right. Those are really important to sort of bake into your process. We also have a great example in the Western United States called the Western States Water Council's Water Data Exchange. They have adopted this sort of common data model approach to bring water use data and water rights data across the Western US into a common data application and data model. So there's some great examples out there of using that sort of ideal data model as a center guiding point and putting that out there so that the data arrives and starts to be interoperable. So that's a menu option that is very technical.
Gracias, Kemia and Greg. Mauricio, nos queda un minuto, no sé si hay una última pregunta, a lo mejor podríamos pedirle a nuestro speaker desarrollarla cada uno en máximo 2 minutos, un comentario. La pregunta es, ¿cómo se ha centrado el manejo de la información hídrica para ayudar a la producción agrícola de pequeños productores, como por ejemplo el Valle de Napa? Podríamos partir por Greg y terminar por Kemia.
That's a work in progress. Our agency does interact with small farms and farms in general. We interact on a water rights basis, and our water rights data ecosystem is undergoing a massive modernization effort right now. And so I think at the end of that pipe, there will be some better interfaces for our different user groups. We are trying to make it an equitable project so that we are focusing on the users that have the most vulnerable impacts to the decisions that we make, as well as maybe not access to the technology. So that's one way to deal with it. And then on water quality, we try to make as light of an impact as possible, but we are the regulators. We write permits and we take enforcement. So the data component is definitely a part of that too.
Yeah, no, and what I'll add to what Greg shared with you is two topics. One is, as you know, we're entering the 3rd year of drought in California, and our department, DWR, and others are putting together a drought monitor information system, and that will include information for the entire state that can be used to make critical decisions. Another regarding the Napa Valley and Sonoma area is having a better understanding of atmospheric rivers and being able to forecast as much a week in advance of when they're approaching and their strength. And our coastal communities, that includes the Napa area, are very highly impacted with that information. So they're now beginning to operate or reoperate their surface reservoirs with in anticipation of oncoming atmospheric river storms. That helps reduce flood risk, and they're taking that water that's released and helping recharge their groundwater basin. So this flood managed aquifer recharge is a really up and coming strategy that can involve and is involving California agriculture, because they have a lot of the land with infiltration capacity to be able to absorb these peak flood flows and have that water in the groundwater bank or basin for the dry periods.